Very much appreciate being here today. For those of you who know Craig Barn, I am a sight for sore eyes because I'll be taking Craig out of your lives a little bit, and he'll be remaining as general counsel for the department. For a while there, he was dual rolling it as director of the Office of Water Policy and general counsel. So now he gets to focus on all of those that run afoul of the law. So that really will be where you will see Craig moving forward. But very much appreciate the opportunity to be here and address you all. It's not often that you get to actually address the experts. So that's one thing that is actually very nice from my local government background. Generally, it was that educational component that was the most important for those local elected officials when it came to alternative water supply sources and uses. Let's see if I can actually operate this. It's a good question.
There we go.
Oh, okay. Is it just? There we go. Perfect. Well, you've seen this chart or a derivative thereof a couple times today, and what I'm going to try to do is move quickly through the genesis of Senate Bill 536 and move more towards the recommendations, as I'm sure that's what you all are more interested in, instead of how the sausage is made, as Senator Simpson put it earlier. But this demand, this chart's actually an important one. And again, you've heard this through John's comments earlier with CFWI. But we're facing a population increase in this state. So much so that by 2030, it's believed there'll be around 24 million people. That's a 26% increase from 2010 Beaver projections. So again, what are those people going to drink? Freshwater demand is estimated to be 7.7 billion gallons a day in 2030. So the reasoning behind the Senate Bill 536 study, the reasoning behind the Central Florida Water Initiative is proactive supply projections, education, and management. So what the legislature required the department to do is go through a 18-month study to ensure that adequate water supply existed. It was an exercise that was done before my time again, so I'm here to take credit for their good work, the work of Janet Llewellyn and Craig Barn and others in the Office of Water Policy who did a heavy lift in putting this together. Our goals were really threefold with this study. It was one, to identify factors that prohibit or complicate the expansion and recommend the expansion of alternative water supply and recommend how those factors can be mitigated. It was also to identify areas in the state where traditional water supply and sources were limited. The use of reclaimed water, stormwater, or excess surface water was necessary. Lastly, it was to determine the feasibility, benefit, and cost estimate needed to construct regional storage facilities for the beneficial use of reclaimed water. And again, I realize that this is not the most important aspect of the study, but just for your uses, I wanted you to see what went through that work and that effort. The department was required to hold a number of public meetings throughout the state. We provided ample opportunity for public comment through a wide variety of stakeholders, whether it was ag, utilities, local governments, individual water users. We sent out surveys. We had 8 water management district workshops. There were 300 comment letters that were sent to the department. And we had regular work team meetings. I've only been at DEP about 4 months, but what I didn't know, I've never been a state worker before, I didn't know that there were pre-meetings for meetings, planning processes for planning meetings, and things like that. So it was very interesting the effort that it took to get everybody on the same page to complete this report. And as you heard from Senator Simpson, who, by the way, in 2022 has thrown his hat into the ring to be Senate President and has a pretty good chance to do it, this work is the beginning of what we're going to do in this state. And if there's someone who will get a comprehensive reclaimed water bill across the finish line, the eventual Senate President is likely to do it. So I want to talk a little bit more, not necessarily in the presentation, but afterwards, where do we go from here now that that report has been completed? And it was submitted on December 1st of this year. That's not what I wanted to do. And again, this is just a 7 major step process that we used to identify the report, from forming the subject matter area work teams, establishing those stakeholder communications, conducting the surveys, holding public workshops, going to different areas of the state, providing those town hall type meetings, and then to give you an idea of the type of groups, again, the multiple stakeholders were involved. In our planning work group, it was the Department of Agriculture, DOT, the 5 water management districts, which were really integral in helping us establish what we were looking for, to define our own universe of the alternative water supply space. Here's an idea of just who actually responded to that survey. We sent out 10,000 email invitations from the department asking folks for input. We were expecting to receive maybe 300 or so back. We ended up getting about 1,000. So the idea and the appetite for folks to respond and give us ideas, it was there. There's no question about it. It was a very broad group of stakeholders who responded. And this is just a little bit of an idea of those different sectors, whether it was public water supply, and the percentage of respondents who actually responded to DEP. It won't surprise you that the 2 biggest impediments that were identified both through the department and from our respondents was regulatory burdens and funding. That was found in whether it was reclaimed, whether it was excess surface water, whether it was stormwater. That seemed to be the MO, if you will, of each. It was not a surprise to see that those led the responses. So again, here's just the broad overview. This was an in-depth discussion of reclaimed water, stormwater, surface water, and then our different storage options. Reservoirs, ASR, aquifer recharge, dispersed water management, which I'll talk a little bit about each as we move forward. It was important to us to separate statewide changes that could be implemented as well as regional efforts. Again, one of the pillars of Secretary Severson's leadership at the department is to ensure that local dollars and local projects, the funding gets to those local projects that are shovel ready, and that you will see earth movement to identify and restore springs, to identify alternative water sources, reservoirs, ASR, and the like. So that is just something that I'll touch on in terms of the amount of money that has gone to those different projects, but really it's more so the collaborative effort and the regionalism that needs to be shared when you're talking about best utilizing our alternative water sources. This is just a history of reclaimed water in the state. Again, with you all being the experts that you are, I don't really have to get into it, but it dates back to 1965 when Tallahassee began using spray irrigation, 1986 when DEP initiated water reuse program, their water reuse program, and then in 88 when water reuse was added to DEP's official water policy with rules to follow in 1989. Here's a small graph identifying the amount of reused water, both in the state and then at each individual water management district. Over the past 30 years, Florida has made great strides, as you all well know, in the expansion of reclaimed water systems, and today we're recognized as a national leader in reuse. It is an essential part of wastewater management, of water resource management, ecosystem management in this state. We use roughly 719 million gallons a day of reclaimed water, and again, I think Bart or someone had mentioned earlier that 45% of the total domestic wastewater flow in the state. So where we go next is how do we capture that remaining 55%? Some types of reuse are obviously more efficient than others at replacing the use of ground or surface waters. And what we're trying to identify is reuse that provides a one-to-one replacement of potable water or a one-to-one recharge of the aquifer. That's the most desirable. And there are a couple ways of doing this, or a couple options that the department and the report have identified in increasing reclaimed utilization. Just a few of those: seasonal storage, system interconnections, demand management, customer selection, supplementation. Those are some of the things that we have identified as being the most important. This is just an idea of some of the funding that the different districts have had from a 10-year period in terms of funding of reclaim projects. As I mentioned, it is a priority of the Secretary to make sure that the dollars are flowing through the districts to those local projects, and I think they really have had an increased effort in doing so, and all of the districts have managed to provide significant funding opportunities through cost-share assistance grants with local governments in order to get those projects shovel-ready and then moving. This represents about $568 million for reclaimed water projects within that 10-year period. Moving to surface waters. Across the U.S., surface water has been and continues to be the predominant cause of water use. It's different in the state of Florida. As you can see, surface water, it really only accounts for about 1/3 of the fresh water withdrawn from the use. And again, what is that doing to our aquifer when that groundwater is such a valuable resource? Obviously, we're blessed to have it, but you can take over advantage of that. So that's where this planning functions for developing alternative water supplies really is crucial as we move forward. This graph is really just to give you an idea of some of the costs, and it was taken from St. John's Water Management District for both traditional and alternative water supplies and the cost of reuse. As you can see, these are for projects between 10 and 20 million gallons per day. You can look at the total unit cost for water taken from the aquifer, from seawater, brackish groundwater, surface water, and then you have some of the costs that alternative water sources can supply as well. Again, as I said before, really funding and the current regulatory structure are seen as the biggest impediments to moving forward as we talk about alternative water supply. And some of those regulatory impediments were the current UIC program. Obtaining a permit for ASR or AR with reclaimed water is challenging. The cost of treating reclaimed water to drinking water standards prior to direct injection is an impediment. It's one that the department recognizes. It's one that we see that some change could be made. There's a lack of regulatory framework in this state for DPR. While one currently exists for indirect potable reuse, there is no structure for DPR. So that's something also that the department understands and wants to work with all of you, all of the stakeholders in this state, to determine the best path forward when we talk about developing the regulatory structure for DPR. There are local regulations, and certainly coming from my local government background, it's against my religion to say preemption, but there are local communities who do go above and beyond the state requirements, and so those need to be looked at as well. We have treatment requirements that are very costly in this state. It's something to keep in mind. We separated those regulatory impediments in reclaimed water, in stormwater, in excess surface water, and I'm happy to go more in depth on those as we move forward. But again, in the reclaimed water space, it was the UIC program. It was AR for IPR, as I like to say, direct potable reuse, supplementation, edible crops, direct irrigation with reclaimed on edible crops that aren't peeled, skinned, cooked, thermally processed before consumption. These are all things that, as the science progresses, as the ick, yuck factor goes away that we've heard so much about, that's when these things become more easily attainable. And I think one of the major things that we touched on, but again in cooperation with local governments, with the citizens of the state of Florida, is the public education component of this. Ensuring that you're getting the message across that you're not only protecting water resources in times of drought, you're creating an alternative water supply that is safe to drink. The science backs that. And so the public component and outreach, the educational component of that, will be crucial as we move forward, and the department certainly recognizes that fact. In the stormwater space, again, it's taking a look at the current consumptive use permitting rules, the ERP rules, our direct recharge regulatory space, and understanding what is the most fluid and most responsible way to move forward. These are some things that we've talked about for the 4 months that I've been there and far preceded my time at the department. But again, it just highlights that our current regulatory structure and the laws of the state of Florida, what can be improved? That's something that we're still looking for comments from all of the stakeholders here, all of your folks back home. It's something that it's important as we continue this dialogue that we understand and get a grasp about when does the department need to promulgate new rules, what rules are currently on the books that can be improved. So that's something that we're very interested in finding out from you all too. Again, just a couple in terms of regulatory impediments as it deals with excess surface water, its flexibility in conjunctive use systems, underground injection control again, and then more permitting options for ASR and direct AR facilities. And I'm not going to talk too much about specific projects as the others will. I did want to bring up just a few, and A-First was one of them, but obviously I won't go into that as we'll hear plenty about that shortly. This is a picture of the CW Bill Young Reservoir, regional reservoir. And just to highlight some of the things that go on throughout the state. Since 2002, surface water has been harvested here from Tampa Bay Regional Surface Water Treatment Plant. And again, it's that regional effort that we really try to focus on and like to highlight. When available water is taken from the Alafia River, from the Hillsborough River, from the Tampa Bypass Canal, some is treated and used immediately. Other water is stored in this 15.5 billion gallon reservoir. It's a cooperative effort of SwiftMud, of Tampa Bay Water, of the city of Tampa, and other folks who really have shown that need and requirement to store excess water. Some of the costs for some of the surface water reservoirs that we have seen throughout the state. The city of Apopka has constructed a 120 million gallon reservoir, and their reservoir has the capability of holding around 85 million gallons in the lined portion of the reservoir. They also have a 35 million gallon unlined portion that then obviously helps the capacity to recharge the aquifer there. Water farming. There's been an increased attention to water farming or dispersed water storage in the legislature as of late, and the reason for that is the cost per million gallon. I think if you saw here the cost per million gallon in the Hillsborough River, the CW Bill Young Reservoir is $17,000. There's a couple projects that are currently in the works in the St. Johns River Water Management District and the South Florida Water Management District, whether it's the Calkins projects or others, where that cost per million gallons is $400. So obviously you're seeing with that storage on those hollow citrus grounds that you need to, you have a greater capacity to store that water for those dry times. And luckily we haven't seen those, but the beauty of this process is planning for the future. I won't get into A-First. Lastly, again, funding. What the department is looking for is significant potable water offsets. What's the best bang for the buck? What's the low-hanging fruit that can be accomplished here? We want to focus on storage, on treatment upgrades to provide water quality suitable for AR. We want to look to fund transmission facilities that supply reclaimed water to large users, infrastructure to connect facilities from the actual users and the suppliers. And again, the real question which we are talking about internally is where do we go from here now that that report has been completed? So I appreciate your time. I look forward to answering any questions you have.
Actually, because we only let you do the short version,
Okay.
we're going to hold questions and get through all of our